Welcome to the Provider's Report, where we delve into the world of value-based healthcare. Our mission is to empower healthcare providers with the knowledge and tools they need to deliver exceptional patient care. Each episode, we explore best practices, innovative strategies, and real-world examples of how to achieve the highest standards in patient communication and outcomes. Join us as we transform the future of healthcare, one conversation at a time.
Hey everyone, welcome to Better Doctor Project, where we interview healthcare providers to tap into their experiences so we can turn our challenges into our biggest strengths. We hope today's episode inspires you to take the next step to become who you want to be in practice. I'm Dr. Beck.
And I'm Dr. Mack.
Let's get started. Hey, it's Dr. Beck. Today's episode is part 1 of 3 in a series we're doing with one of my favorite people, Dr. Shawn Neff. He's a doctor of chiropractic at the Martinsburg VA Medical Center. For those of you who don't know, I actually spent 8 months with him as my supervisor at that hospital toward the end of my training. As you heard in our intro episode, it was there that I began to dream of ideas for BDP. This was almost 3 years ago. I learned so much in such a short amount of time, and I knew there had to be a better way for healthcare providers to share their experiences with one another for both professional and personal growth. Today, you're going to get a glimpse of some of that magic from Dr. Neff. This series is going to be about how to say goodbye to your patients the right way. And yes, we realize that sounds a little bit like a breakup, but let's be real. Sometimes it feels that way. Part 1 is the happy conversation, though. We're going to talk about why we might break up with a patient for a good reason and what that breakup actually means. Have you ever had a patient not understand why their care was ending? I know I have. My favorite story that comes to mind is a 5-year-old that cried and screamed when I told her parents that we had reached the end of her active treatment for her neck pain. Thankfully, I knew how to handle that situation in that moment, thanks to Dr. Neff. Would you know how to handle it? Well, don't worry. You're going to learn today. What about how to properly explain to a patient the expectations that you have for them outside of your office? Let's go ahead and dive in. Hey, Dr. Neff, thanks so much for joining us today. How are you?
Real well, thanks.
Awesome. The topic of discussion for today is going to be why we as healthcare providers sometimes need to say goodbye to our patients. We all know that there are multiple reasons for this. Do you mind just touching on what some of those reasons might be?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the obvious reasons that you would say goodbye to a patient, number one is that maybe it's their choice. Number two, they got better and no longer need you. Or number three, they're not getting better and they need something else.
Exactly. So today I want to really focus on the positive one that you mentioned. I really want to talk about, how we're going to say goodbye to a patient because it's a good thing. They got better. Either your treatment is over and you wrapped up, they met all their goals. So go ahead and give me some reasons aside from that as to why you as a healthcare professional might want to go ahead and do that.
Before we get to, saying goodbye to somebody, I always tell my students that discharge planning starts on intake. So I think, your very first visit with a patient for a condition, you need to determine, kind of in your mind's eye, what success looks like, what failure looks like, what your goals are, so that you know when you reach an endpoint of a clinical relationship. Kind of go in with the ends in sight.
Do you, take their input into account? Obviously, are you asking them also what their goals are and addressing that in your end of care approach as well so that they realize they've reached that endpoint? Or do they really just are more of a passive participant and they hear what you're saying that you've reached the goal I've set for you? How do you approach that?
Well, I think using their goals is one of the most important things that you can do, because really we're partners helping them reach their goals. My goals about reaching some arbitrary line on an outcome measure are probably less important to them than their goals about whatever activity they'd like to start doing again. Certainly then, like I said, my goal is probably secondary to them. They're just maybe easier to track for me.
Right. What do you think are some goals healthcare providers might care about more than a patient?
Um, well, so like for instance, ranges of motion. Um, I think patients like to be able to do things. They don't necessarily notice ranges of motion. They don't notice motion asymmetry. They don't notice the way that their body compensates for the things that they can't do,
Definitely.
unless they're pointed out. Um, and honestly, I don't even know that pain is as big of a driver as we treat it as. I think activities are. I know lots of people who suffer in pain until they can't do something that they want to do. People will suffer with pain if it keeps them from doing things they don't like to do. If I have back pain and I can't mow my lawn, totally okay with that. If I have back pain and I can't, ride a motorcycle or pick up my kid, now that becomes, that's an emergency at that point.
Absolutely. Let's say maybe a patient doesn't know what those kinds of goals are yet. How can you try to get that out of them? What kinds of questions can you ask? Because we can't necessarily say, what are your functional goals? How can we
Right.
encourage them to think about maybe what they're missing?
So I think that's where, when you get to those social aspects of history, finding out, what they do for a living, what their hobbies are, what things they're interested in, what they're passionate about. And I think
Yeah.
that's just really getting to know your patient as a person. And there's a whole world of educational pieces on motivational interviewing, which is, essentially a framework for how to talk to a patient to have a shared goal making process.
Yeah, that's a great point that I hadn't thought of until right now. But you could easily have a healthcare provider, for example, that doesn't really realize the importance of those social and familial history aspects of the patient intake. We might even have a patient who thinks, oh, goodness, here's 5 pages of paperwork. Why does this even matter? Why do you need to know that I like to play volleyball on the weekends? But that's a perfect example right there about how we should care about that information as a healthcare provider. I love it.
And even beyond that, I think getting down to those sort of things helps you get a bigger picture of the patient. There's a certain amount of functional and social togetherness that has to happen for a person to be able to maintain a marriage, maintain employment, maintain a house, maintain family relationships, maintain activities. And when you don't see those things, I think that's telling about the state that the patient's in.
I also think it helps shift the patient's focus too, right, to those functional goals and really allows them to be heard and to feel heard and feel listened to, because that's something I'm sure Dr. Neff experience all the time are patients who come in and feel that they aren't always listened to, whether it's by providers or other people, but especially when it comes to health, they want you to care about what matters to them. Do you find that this is true pretty much throughout your patient base?
Uh, yeah, with some patients more than others. There's just certainly some generational divides with patients. Some patients really just want to come in, have you tell them how to fix it, or fix it. But yeah, I think most human beings want to be validated as people, and obviously want you to care about the things that they care about, at least within the sphere that you're working with them in.
So obviously there are some differences you see in your patients generationally, and there has to be balance between you and each patient. So how do you approach that when you do see those differences in relation to your efforts and patient effort? Is there any time where you find a provider is giving too much? Let's say if one of those patients, like you discussed, is sort of ready to just sit back and be treated, or do you find that there's a way to either encourage those people to participate in their care, or would you just recognize what they want and move forward with that?
I think that varies based on the patient. Um, I think there's some patients that I just accept that that their interest is going to be what their interest is. But I would say when you get into things like complex chronic pain, where there's a significant amount of biopsychosocial overlay, where that's really driving, then, you're dealing with, problems of self-efficacy, you're dealing with problems of passivity, and that negatively impacts the clinical outcome. And so sometimes with those patients, you have to have a firmer hand, and essentially use passive therapies as a carrot to get them to engage in active activities that maybe they're less interested in because they're kinesiophobic, because they're afraid, to do anything. Whereas there's other patients who I think, are, simple chronic pain patients who are relatively well treated and easily maintained, where I think it's fine with those patients sometimes to just treat it passively, as long as they're actively engaged in doing things. They have hobbies, they have a job, kind of if they're keeping all the things together, then periodic passive treatments, of a supportive nature, I think are completely fine. And a lot of that comes down to knowing your patient. And some patients have, attitudes maybe that are less helpful, but you're unlikely to change. I have one patient who is 84 now, maybe 85. And urology called me and said, "Hey, you have a really good relationship with this person. Could you talk him into taking his chemotherapy for his prostate cancer?" And I said, "I can talk to him, but he'll probably tell me the same thing that he told me about his heart medication when cardiology asked me to talk to him. Because what he told me was, I already told them if I wake up and my heart's working, I'm not taking it." And that was exactly his answer about his prostate medicine as well. So is that, super helpful for him as a person, getting treatment? No, not terribly. At the same time, at 85, am I likely to change him? No, I've tried. I tell him all the reasons why he should take the medicine and why he should listen to his doctor. And he always tells me, "Shawn, you're a good boy." And then it's left at that. So
it's a perfect example of how there cannot be such a thing as cookie cutter healthcare, because every single patient is different. Just like you had that 80 something year old, you could easily have a patient who's 22 and wants to be a professional bodybuilder, and you might not have to worry about them at all because they eat super clean. They do every recommendation you give them, and that's a totally opposite end of the spectrum, right? And so if we treat everybody the same, you're gonna miss some really key concepts.
yeah, absolutely.
So, perfect example, let's say you had a patient you saw for X number of weeks and they did excellent. They reached all their goals, loved the care, you were happy with the results. And then that day came where you realized, okay, it's their last visit. I have to tell them that I'm dismissing them. Have you ever had have you ever had a patient who just would not accept it? They either took it negatively, even though it's a positive thing, or maybe they just said flat out, no, I don't want to stop. How do you handle it when a patient does that?
Okay, so yes, that's happened. And I get it. We develop a relationship. It feels a little one-sided, like you're being broken up with. I think one important thing is expectation setting, making sure that they realize that, care has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Letting them know that. So normally on the first visit, I tell them, this is what we're going to do. This is how long we're going to try this. As long as we reach the benchmarks and you're getting better, then, this will be the next step. It'll be one of these three things. We'll transition you to active care so that you're doing some things to help keep you better. And, we use a consult system in my medical center where essentially once they've been consulted to me, they can come back in as long as it was successful anytime within the following 2 years for the same condition. And I let them know that, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not moving. We'll both still be alive. I'm not changing my phone number. If you need me, just call me. I'll get you back in here. But don't forget to try these things, these tools that I gave you to take care of yourself first. So, low back pain's episodic. This is probably going to come back. It may be because you did something dumb. It may be just the way it works. When that happens, do these things, do these exercises. Some of these exercises you're supposed to be doing every day, just like brushing your teeth. But then, we have these other exercises, if it hurts, do these exercises, ice it. If that doesn't work after a couple days, call me, we'll get you back in and fix it again. And for most people, especially, like I said, who have simple chronic pain, that's a really effective way. I'm sure both you guys saw the Nordic back pain maintenance care study that just came out. And Rebecca, you and I talked about that a bunch back when the data was still pre-published, that, it kind of shows that, like I said, there's some people you're not going to change. There's some people who aren't self-efficacious. There's some people who are passive in their healthcare. There's some people who are kinesiophobic that you're not going to be able to change. And those people seem to do better with planned check-ins because it gives them that safety net to live and be active between these known things. Whereas people who don't have these yellow flag symptoms, these biopsychosocial symptoms as heavily, they can just kind of live until it gets worse. These people are expecting it to be horrible. So having that planned visit allows them to, like I said, live. They can do things because they know that there's somebody coming to fix them somewhere in the middle because they don't have the active capacity to fix themselves.
Again, it sounds like it's that repeat concept of not cookie cuttering things. Every single patient is going to have different things that inspire them to do the exercise you gave them, take that medication that was given to them by a provider. So because they're all different, we need to recognize that from the beginning of care, not only, but also at the end when we are dismissing them. And the good thing about all this is relatively positive. The patients at this point where they've completed care, they're doing well. Obviously, this is part one of what we're going to be talking about, but part two and part three are going to be transitioning to more of the not so fun reasons why we have to dismiss a patient, right? The need for a referral or co-management, or possibly the condition being slightly worse than we had originally anticipated. So the good news is, you're right. We're in a positive setting. We should be encouraging them to have all these recommendations that they can stay up on. Before we wrap up part one, a big thing I want to discuss, I know you being at the medical center that you obviously have some of the greatest patients, some really awesome patient stories. Have you ever had a patient refuse to stop care? Did you ever have a patient where they just absolutely wouldn't take no for an answer and you had to literally calm them down?
I probably 10 years ago, I had a patient who he was doing really, really well, which was exciting. He was doing very good. He came in, I explained to him that, he'd hit all these clinical benchmarks, we'd met all these goals, reminded him of the things he was doing, let him know that we were going to go ahead and discharge him. And he promptly cursed me out, slammed my door, and left.
Oh my gosh.
And then called me later to yell at me again. And when he called, then, I explained to him, like, look, this is where we're at. It doesn't mean you can never see me again.
Exactly.
And he calmed down. And once I explained it to him and let him know, like, look, when you have an episode, where it gets beyond your capacity to take care of it yourself at home, call me, I'll get you back in.
Exactly.
And he's actually a fantastic patient for that. He's now been on a PRN status off and on for 10 years. And he never swears at me anymore. So that's also a plus.
It sounds like you reset those expectations even after he'd already left and cussed you out because he missed you so much already.
He liked me so much he had to yell at me. But yeah, I mean, I think another thing about, reminding patient about expectations. I'm normally very clear with people that, episodes have a tendency to come back. And I've had patients where they've gotten better, they've left, they go on, and then at some point, it returns. And, and sometimes that can be really disconcerting for patients because they were better and now it's back. And, if they let it go too long, then they start kind of that whole internal dialogue of, oh, maybe this is just the way it's going to be forever. And, they can sometimes, really catastrophize. And I have to, talk them back down. I have a patient who's an airline pilot who had this re-exacerbation, and, he was, really, really, really in his feels about it, that this was just how life was. And he couldn't believe that this had happened again. And, this is just the way it's going to be. And I had to say, listen, we got you better before, remember? And he said, yes. I said, just trust the process. And he said, okay, doc. And then, he got better. I think, like I said, being able to talk people back from kind of that cliff of catastrophization, because you forget that things worked before. When you're in that moment, I know you guys don't have kids yet, but if you ever do, when babies cry, it kind of completely destroys your ability to focus on anything else. And you're kind of stuck in that moment where you're like, if I could just get them to be quiet, I know I could figure out something to make them be quiet. And I think pain's that way. When you start to get into pain, your ability to think of anything rational to fix it, even if you've, already been through this before, it just kind of stops working.
Absolutely. And I think it's easy to avoid too, like the conversations that we don't want to talk about because they don't instinctively restore hope. Or talking about, yes, you're better. It's important to celebrate those things, but I think it's also so imperative to outline that so they feel safe and secure when they realize, oh, this is just what Dr. Neff told me would happen.
Yeah. And I can tell you, I try to under promise. If you tell them I expect this to happen within this amount of time, give yourself a little buffer, because then if you meet it a little bit earlier, then you look, maybe even smarter, which is great. Patients, want to think that their doctor's smart. And certainly all of us would like them to think that as well.
Well, and you're being more realistic that way too. And that can be said about any field in healthcare. If we give patients guarantees about things we can't guarantee, we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure.
and probably violating the law in most
Yeah.
cases too.
Definitely. Well, Dr. Neff, thank you so much. This was great for part one, obviously talking about dismissing care because of a good reason, because a patient's doing so much better. So I thank you so much for coming on. We're looking forward to parts 2 and 3 coming up. So to close, do you have anything that you can give somebody listening as a takeaway message, something that they can start implementing in practice right now to start making their transitions for a good reason to dismiss care?
Yeah, I think just start with orienting the patient to the plan day one. This is what we're going to do. This is what success looks like. This is how we know when we got there. And if we're not getting there, then, we'll address that as well. Kind of here are the different avenues that we're going to take. And here's when we're going to know when we're making these changes. I think everybody does better with orienting. And patients are not an exception to that.
Definitely. Set expectations and keep going, right?
Absolutely.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Neff. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Hey, it's Dr. Mac. Thank you so much for taking the next step to becoming the best provider you can be with us on today's episode, exploring how to end a treatment plan when a patient has achieved their goals. Stay tuned for part 2 for more stories from Dr. Neff as we discuss ending care a different way when a referral or co-management is necessary. Oh, fun fact, Dr. Neff is also the editor-in-chief for the Journal of the International Academy of Neuromusculoskeletal Medicine. So if you're a doc and you're looking to publish some great research in the MSK realm, he's an amazing contact to have. I'll make sure to put his email in the show notes for you on our website. In those notes, you'll also find all the other amazing content from today's episode, helpful guides, and lots more about Dr. Neff. Please feel free to share all of this with your friends and colleagues so they can learn and grow with us too. Hit that subscribe button to get access as soon as our next episode comes out. See you for part 2. We loved connecting with you today on this episode of the Better Doctor Project. We can't wait to share our next podcast with you in just 2 weeks. Same time, same place. Until then, pop over to Instagram to follow us at Better Doctor Project or keep up with us at betterdoctorproject.com.
Thank you for tuning in to the Provider's Report. We hope you found today's episode valuable and inspiring. To stay updated with our latest episodes, subscribe to our podcast wherever you like to listen. For more resources and continuing education opportunities, visit our website. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of our patients and truly set a standard for value-based healthcare.